In the temperature-controlled archives of what was once the Soviet State Library in Moscow, there's a classified section that hasn't been opened since 1983. The section contains approximately 2,000 documents that exhibit what archivists called autonomous thermal anomaly, papers that are measurably colder than their surrounding environment. Not refrigerated, not externally cooled, just cold. The documents arrived at the library between 1967 and 1982, originating from various government ministries and research institutes across the USSR. Initially, the cold was attributed to storage conditions or handling procedures. Then, archivists noticed that the temperature difference was increasing over time. Documents that arrived only slightly cool became progressively colder with each passing year. By 1979, some documents were cold enough to cause frostbite on contact. The official explanation is equipment malfunction and faulty environmental controls. But the reports inside describe 15 years of documenting papers that got colder the longer they existed, regardless of storage conditions and the disturbing pattern in what those documents contained. The phenomenon was first documented in March 1967 by a senior archivist named Dmitry Volkov, who was processing newly transferred materials from the Ministry of Defense. His incident report, filed March 18th, describes a routine cataloging session that became unusual. During processing of materials from Defense Ministry Archive 14, I noted that document reference 14-227-B felt noticeably cold to touch. Room temperature was standard at 18 degrees Celsius. Document temperature measured at 12 degrees Celsius. No explanation for temperature differential. Document had been in climate-controlled storage since receipt 2 days prior. Exterior shows no signs of moisture or prior refrigeration. Volkov assumed the document had been stored incorrectly before transfer and simply needed to equilibrate to room temperature. He set it aside and continued cataloging. When he returned to the document 3 hours later, it was colder, now measuring 9 degrees Celsius. The room temperature had not changed. Volkov's follow-up report states, document temperature decreased further despite remaining in stable environment. This is thermodynamically anomalous. Materials do not spontaneously cool below ambient temperature without external energy input. Request technical evaluation to determine cause. The technical evaluation was conducted by Dr. Elena Petrova, a physicist who specialized in thermodynamics and was occasionally consulted on archive preservation issues. Her report from March 1967 is brief but perplexed. Examine document 14-227-B under controlled conditions. Ambient temperature 18 degrees Celsius. Document temperature 7 degrees Celsius and continuing to decrease. No evidence of phase change, evaporative cooling, or chemical reaction that would explain heat loss. Thermal imaging shows document is radiating less infrared than ambient environment, as if actively absorbing thermal energy. Mechanism unknown. Recommend continued observation. Over the following week, the document continued cooling. By March the 25th, it had reached 1 degree Celsius. At that point, moisture from the air began condensing on its surface. Dr. Petrova's updated report notes, document is now cold enough to produce visible condensation. Surface temperature below dew point for ambient humidity. The paper remains dry to touch despite condensation, suggesting the moisture evaporates rapidly upon contact. More significantly, the document shows no signs of physical degradation despite extreme temperature differential. Paper remains flexible, ink remains legible. This violates expected thermal stress behavior. The content of document 14-227-B was unremarkable. A personnel transfer order from 1964, reassigning 3 military officers to new posts. Nothing classified, nothing unusual. Just routine bureaucratic paperwork. Yet this mundane document was exhibiting thermodynamic properties that violated known physics. Dr. Petrova recommended the document be isolated and monitored long-term to determine if the cooling would continue or reach some equilibrium point. By April 1967, other archivists had begun reporting similar observations. A document from the Ministry of Agriculture processing grain production statistics. A memo from the Ministry of Culture regarding theater scheduling. A technical report from a metallurgy institute. All exhibiting the same phenomenon. Spontaneous cooling below ambient temperature. All different in content and origin, but all sharing the characteristic of being colder than they should be. A pattern analysis was conducted in May 1967 by the chief archivist Boris Petrov. His report identified a troubling commonality.
Analysis of 17 documents exhibiting thermal anomaly reveals they all originated from facilities or departments that were closed or reorganized between document creation and archive receipt. Personnel transfer orders from disbanded units, reports from shuttered research programs, memos from eliminated departments. The documents appear to be remnants of organizational structures that no longer exist.
This observation was intriguing but didn't explain the physics. Dead bureaucracies don't make paper cold. Dr. Petrova proposed a hypothesis in June 1967.
Documents may contain information that is no longer actively referenced or connected to living organizational memory. When information becomes truly orphaned, no one remembers it, no one uses it, no institution maintains it. Perhaps it loses some quality we would describe metaphorically as warmth. The thermal anomaly may be physical manifestation of informational death.
This was speculative and frankly strange, but it was the only hypothesis that fit the pattern. To test it, Dr. Petrova suggested a simple experiment. Take a cold document and bring it back into active use. Reference it. Copy it. Integrate it into current work. See if reconnecting the information to living organizational memory affected its temperature. The experiment was conducted in July 1967 using document 14-227-B, which by then had reached a stable temperature of -3 degrees Celsius. The document was photographed, transcribed, and its contents were filed into current personnel records at the Ministry of Defense. The original document was returned to monitored storage. Dr. Petrova's report from August 1967 describes the results. Following reintegration of document content into active records, temperature began increasing. Over a 2-week period, document warmed from -3 degrees to +7 degrees Celsius, approaching but not reaching ambient temperature. Effect suggests some correlation between informational use and thermal state. However, mechanism remains completely unknown. By late 1967, the archive had identified 43 cold documents. A dedicated storage room was established with continuous temperature monitoring. The documents were cataloged by content, origin, date, and temperature. Over the following years, this collection grew steadily. Documents arrived from various sources, some already exhibiting thermal anomaly, others developing it after archival. By 1970, the collection numbered more than 300 items. A research assistant named Irina Volkova was assigned to maintain detailed logs of the cold documents. Her reports from 1970 to 1972 document the progression.
Documents show consistent cooling trend over time. Average temperature decrease approximately 0.5 degrees Celsius per month in storage. Documents that have been archived longest are coldest. Document 14-227-B, now 5 years in archive, has reached -8 degrees Celsius. Newer acquisitions typically stabilize between 0 and 5 degrees Celsius before beginning gradual further cooling.
More troubling, the documents were affecting their environment. Storage room temperature required constant climate control to prevent the documents from cooling the ambient air. Volkova's report from March 1972 notes the growing problem. The cold document collection now contained 412 items with combined thermal deficits sufficient to measurably affect room temperature. Without active heating, the storage room would equilibrate approximately 3 degrees below building baseline. The documents were functioning as heat sinks, continuously absorbing thermal energy from the environment. In 1973, Dr. Petrova conducted more sophisticated thermal analysis using equipment borrowed from a physics laboratory. Her findings, documented in May 1973, were deeply anomalous. Precise calorimetry revealed the documents were not merely cold, but were actively cooling. They were removing thermal energy from their environment at a steady rate. Total heat absorption across the collection was approximately 2.3 kilowatts continuous. This energy was not being stored in the documents. They maintained constant temperature. The absorbed energy was effectively disappearing. This violated conservation of energy and had no explanation in conventional thermodynamics. The implications were concerning enough that the research was elevated to classified status. The KGB assigned a liaison officer, Colonel Andrei Sokolov, to monitor the investigation. His presence indicated that someone in the security apparatus wondered if the thermal anomaly had strategic implications. Perhaps it was a new form of information encryption. Perhaps it indicated foreign sabotage. Perhaps it was something else entirely that the state apparatus couldn't ignore. Under Colonel Sokolov's oversight, the investigation became more systematic and more secretive. Additional cold documents were actively sought from archives across the USSR. By 1975, the collection had grown to more than 800 items. The storage facility was expanded and upgraded with industrial-grade climate control. The documents were studied intensively, subjected to every analytical technique available to 1970s materials science. A pattern emerged that Dr. Petrova documented in a classified report from November 1975. Analysis of document content revealed correlation between information type and cooling rate. Documents containing purely factual data, production statistics, technical measurements, objective observations, cooled slowly and stabilized at moderately reduced temperatures. Documents containing human testimony, personal accounts, subjective assessments, emotional content, cooled much faster and reached much lower temperatures. The coldest documents in the collection were personal letters, diary entries, and testimonies from individuals who were now deceased. This suggested the phenomenon was somehow related to human consciousness or memory. Documents containing living people's thoughts were warmer. Documents containing thoughts of the dead were coldest. It was an eerie correlation, more supernatural than scientific, but the data supported it consistently. In 1976, an incident occurred that deepened the mystery. A researcher named Dr. Yevgeny Orlov was conducting routine temperature measurements when he discovered a document that had reached minus 18 degrees Celsius, far colder than any previously recorded. The document was a personal letter written in 1958 by a factory worker to his supervisor. Dr. Orlov's incident report describes what happened when he attempted to read it.
Upon touching document to turn page, experienced immediate severe pain in fingers. Document surface temperature minus 18 degrees Celsius, sufficient to cause instant frostbite. Withdrew contact immediately. However, while touching document, I experienced brief but intense sensory impression. Feeling of profound sadness and isolation. Impression faded immediately upon releasing document. Effect may be psychosomatic response to cold, or may indicate document is affecting consciousness directly.
3 other researchers attempted to handle the same document under controlled conditions. All reported similar experiences. Cold-induced pain, followed by emotional impression of sadness, loneliness, or grief. Dr. Petrova's analysis concluded, the document appears to be transmitting not just thermal deficit, but also emotional state. The writer of the letter was describing personal isolation and depression. Those emotions may be somehow preserved in the document structure and transmitted to readers through the same mechanism that produces the thermal anomaly. This led to a disturbing new understanding. The documents weren't just cold. They were carrying some quality of the information they contained in a way that affected physical reality. Dead information made paper cold. Sad information made it colder, and the effect was cumulative. The longer a document remained orphaned and unread, the stronger the effect became. By 1978, the collection contained more than 1,500 cold documents, some reaching temperatures below minus 20 degrees Celsius. Handling them required insulated gloves. Storage required industrial refrigeration equipment running in reverse to add heat rather than remove it. The facility was consuming enormous amounts of energy just to keep the documents from cooling their environment to uninhabitable levels. But more concerning than the energy costs were the effects the documents were having on personnel who worked with them regularly. Archive staff began reporting unusual experiences when handling the coldest documents. A cataloger named Marina Sokolova described in her personnel file from March 1978.
When processing document 67-441-C, a personal diary from 1962, I experienced strong emotional reaction upon contact. Not just from reading content, but from physical touch. The cold seemed to penetrate beyond my fingers. I felt grief that wasn't mine, memories that weren't mine. For several minutes after handling the document, I experienced dissociative state, as if my own thoughts were being displaced by someone else's.
Dr. Petrova investigated these reports and discovered a pattern. The psychological effects were strongest with documents that contained highly personal or emotional content, and they intensified with the document's temperature. A letter that had cooled to minus 15 degrees would produce stronger emotional impressions than a report at minus 5 degrees. She wrote in a supplementary study from May 1978. Personnel exposure to cold documents is producing measurable psychological effects. Staff report intrusive thoughts, emotional states inconsistent with their own mental baseline, and brief periods of dissociation that correlate with document handling. Effect is dose-dependent. Longer exposure to colder documents produces stronger and longer-lasting psychological disruption. The documents were no longer just cold, they were infectious. And the facility was running out of ways to contain them. Medical examinations of affected staff revealed additional anomalies. Dr. Viktor Morozov, the facility's medical officer, documented in July 1978.
Staff members who handle cold documents regularly show reduced core body temperature, averaging 0.3 to 0.7 degrees below normal baseline. This reduction persists for hours after document contact ceases. Additionally, several staff report feeling colder than usual, even in heated spaces, as if the documents have altered their thermal regulation. One archivist described it as carrying the cold inside me, even when I'm away from the documents.
An incident in August 1978 escalated concerns significantly. An archivist named Alexei Volkov was working alone in the cold document vault when he failed to exit at the scheduled time. When security checked on him 40 minutes later, they found him sitting at a work table, holding a document in his bare hands, unresponsive to verbal commands. The document was a personal letter written in 1959 by a prisoner who had died in custody. The letter's temperature was minus 22 degrees Celsius, cold enough to cause severe frostbite. The medical report describes Volkov's condition. Subject found in catatonic state, holding document 59-318-F in direct skin contact. Hands showed severe tissue damage consistent with prolonged cold exposure. Core body temperature measured at 34.2 degrees Celsius, indicating moderate hypothermia despite room temperature of 18 degrees. Subject was non-responsive for approximately 12 minutes after removal from vault. Upon regaining awareness, subject reported experiencing memories and emotions of the document's author. Subject stated,
I was him. I was the man who wrote that letter. I felt what he felt. I was in that cell. I was waiting to die.
Subject required 3 days of psychiatric observation before returning to baseline mental state. Following this incident, new safety protocols were implemented. No personnel were permitted to handle documents colder than minus 15 degrees Celsius. Contact time was limited to 15 minutes maximum. Psychological screening was required before and after document exposure. But the protocols couldn't prevent what staff were increasingly reporting: that the cold was somehow contagious, that exposure to the documents was changing them in ways that persisted long after physical contact ended. A research assistant named Dmitry Kuznetsov kept a private journal documenting his experience working with the collection. Entries from late 1978, recovered after his resignation, describe progressive effects.
Week 1. Documents feel colder than thermometer readings suggest. Week 3. I dream about people I've never met. They're cold. They want to be remembered. Week 6. I can sense the documents now. Which ones are coldest? Which ones contain the saddest memories? It's like they're calling out. Week 9. I'm forgetting things about my own life while remembering things from the documents. Yesterday, I couldn't recall my mother's face, but I remembered perfectly a woman described in a 1961 letter. A woman I've never met and who is certainly dead. Week 12. I requested transfer. I can't work here anymore. The cold isn't just in the documents. It's in me now.
Dr. Petrova's analysis of these effects led to a troubling hypothesis, documented in a classified memo from October 1978. The documents are not merely preserving information. They appear to be actively drawing warmth from their environment, and that includes warmth from human consciousness. Staff exposure results in transfer of thermal energy and possibly cognitive energy from personnel to documents. The more time spent handling cold documents, the more the individual's own thoughts and memories cool and fade. We may be feeding the documents with our own vitality, allowing dead information to persist by draining life from living minds. A security assessment was conducted in 1979 by Colonel Sokolov's office. The classified report recommended: the cold document collection represents potential hazard. Thermal deficit is increasing with collection size and document age. Current trajectory suggests storage facility will require increasingly unsustainable energy input to maintain habitable temperature. Additionally, psychological effects on personnel handling documents are concerning. Recommend containment strategy and consideration of a document destruction. But destroying the documents proved problematic. A test conducted in March 1980 attempted to incinerate a cold document to determine if thermal destruction would eliminate the anomaly. The paper was placed in a furnace at 800 degrees Celsius. Dr. Petrova supervised the experiment personally and documented the results in detail.
A document resisted combustion for 17 minutes despite furnace temperature sufficient to instantly ignite normal paper. Paper surface showed no charring or smoke production during initial exposure. When combustion finally occurred, temperature in furnace dropped measurably. Pyrometer readings decreased from 800 to 732 degrees Celsius over 30-second burn duration. The burning document was absorbing thermal energy from furnace rather than releasing it as normal combustion would. Ash residue collected immediately after combustion measured at -5 degrees Celsius and remained cold for approximately 2 hours before warming to ambient temperature.
A second test attempted mechanical destruction. A cold document was shredded into small fragments. Each fragment retained the thermal anomaly, with temperature measurements showing the shredded pieces were collectively just as cold as the intact document had been. Dr. Petrova's analysis concluded: physical destruction does not eliminate the thermal deficit. The anomaly appears to be associated with the information content rather than the physical substrate. Whether intact or fragmented, the information retains its property of thermal reduction. This suggests the phenomenon operates at informational level rather than material level. A more desperate experiment was attempted in June 1980. Researchers tried to warm a document by actively reintroducing its content into living organizational memory. A cold personnel file from a disbanded military unit was selected. The individuals named in the document were located, interviewed, and asked to recall the events described. Their testimonies were recorded and cross-referenced with the original document. The document was then filed into active military records and flagged for periodic review. The results were documented by research assistant Elena Volkov. Following reintegration into active records and correlation with living testimony, document 72-156-A showed measurable temperature increase over 6-week period. Initial temperature -11 degrees Celsius. After living, subjects confirmed and elaborated on document contents, temperature increased to -3 degrees Celsius. However, temperature then stabilized and began declining again. By week 12, document had returned to -9 degrees Celsius despite continued periodic reference. Effect suggests that while connecting information to living memory temporarily reduces thermal anomaly, the effect cannot be sustained if the information concerns past events that are fundamentally completed and cannot be made current again. This meant there was no practical solution. Documents describing closed chapters of history, dead people, finished events, dissolved organizations, could not be permanently warmed because their content was inherently oriented toward the past. The information was dead because the reality it described was dead, and no amount of remembering could change that fundamental truth. In 1982, the decision was made to seal the collection. The documents were consolidated into a single climate-controlled vault with automated heating systems designed to run indefinitely. The vault was locked, and the key was archived separately. Research was terminated. Dr. Petrova was reassigned. The facility staff was reduced to minimal maintenance personnel. The official explanation was budgetary constraints. The real reason was that no one knew how to solve the problem, and continuing to accumulate cold documents was creating an ever-growing heat sink that defied physics and reason. The vault's monitoring systems continued reporting temperature data until 1983, when the automated systems were disconnected as part of broader budget cuts. The final recorded measurements showed the document collection at an average temperature of minus 23 degrees Celsius and still cooling. The estimated thermal deficit was sufficient that, if the heating systems failed, the vault would reach temperatures below minus 40 degrees Celsius within weeks. After the Soviet collapse in 1991, the cold document facility was largely forgotten. The building changed ownership several times. Various organizations used other parts of the structure, but the sealed vault remained undisturbed. Maintenance logs from the 1990s occasionally reference unusual cold spot in basement level and excessive heating costs in lower sections, but no one investigated the cause. In 2004, a renovation contractor working on the building reported to city officials that a basement room was showing impossible temperature readings and requested permission to open a sealed vault to inspect climate control equipment. Permission was denied by authorities who referenced classified documentation from the Soviet period. The vault remained sealed. A security guard who worked in the building between 2008 and 2012 described in an online post,
"There's a door in the basement that's always cold to touch. Not just cool, actually cold, like metal in winter, even though the building is heated. Sometimes you can see frost on the door frame. Management says it's old refrigeration equipment that got sealed up when the building changed hands. But I've heard sounds from behind that door. Not mechanical sounds, like paper rustling, like pages turning, even though there's no one in there and hasn't been for decades."
In 2019, a team of academic researchers investigating Soviet-era archives requested access to the sealed cold document collection. Their request was reviewed and denied by Russian state security services. The official response stated, "Materials in question contain sensitive historical documents requiring continued protection. Access is not authorized at this time." No timeline was provided for when access might be granted. The vault remains sealed. Inside, approximately 2,000 documents continue their thermodynamic descent, growing colder year by year, absorbing thermal energy from their environment, defying the laws of physics that govern how heat and matter interact. The information they contain, the dead thoughts, the dissolved organizations, the orphaned knowledge, persists in paper form. But the warmth that accompanies living memory has drained away completely. And perhaps the documents are still cooling. Perhaps they've reached temperatures far below anything measured during active research. Perhaps the vault interior is cold enough now to freeze moisture from the air, coating the documents in layers of frost that preserve them perfectly while making them utterly untouchable. Perhaps the papers have become so cold that they've begun affecting space itself, creating a zone where thermal energy doesn't just dissipate but ceases to exist. Or perhaps the documents have finally reached some equilibrium, some final stable state where orphaned information settles. Cold, isolated, forgotten. Existing in paper form, but disconnected from any consciousness that might read or remember or care about what they contain. Dead information in physical form. Knowledge that has frozen, because no living mind maintains its warmth. The vault door is still cold to touch. The heating systems still run, fighting against a thermal deficit that refuses to explain itself. And inside, in absolute darkness, the pages remain, colder than they should be, colder than physics allows. Cold with the specific chill of information that has been completely and permanently forgotten. Cold with the temperature of thoughts that no one thinks anymore. Cold with the final state of knowledge that has lost all connection to consciousness and has nothing left to do but freeze.